Hello there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach.
Hiya, welcome. I'm Rachel.
Yeah, you are.
You're so funny.
I've been looking forward to this all week. Can't wait.
I always look forward to doing our recording, ready for our next released episodes.
Oh yeah, and this one is pretty brutal.
Yeah,
buckle up for this one.
Well, before we begin, just a small request from us.
If you enjoy listening to our true crime stories, please give us a like, a follow, and a 5-star rating. It takes like 30 seconds at most.
Don't cost you anything.
Yeah. It really helps us out. And also you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Murder Most British and on Facebook at MMB Podcast.
You can also join us in the public crypt chat, which is our free Discord channel, where you can talk about cases, share theories, and read the latest news from the archive.
Your support helps the archive grow and ensures no story is ever forgotten. Also, this episode contains detailed discussions of abduction, prolonged captivity, torture, and murder. Some descriptions of violence and abuse are explicit and may be distressing, so listener discretion is strongly advised.
Now let's get stuck into this case.
Some cases announce themselves immediately. Noise, panic, sirens. Others don't announce themselves at all. A phone stops ringing, messages go unanswered, appointments are missed. At first, it looks ordinary, like avoidance, like somebody stepping away from trouble. But quiet can be misleading. Sometimes it's the surface over something already strained. This story does not begin with a crime scene. It begins with pressure.
Glasgow in the late 2000s was reshaping itself. New apartment blocks tower in the riverbanks, old streets caught between demolition and revival. The city was selling a future made of glass and steel, while still carrying the muscle memory of harder decades. It was a place where ambition didn't need pedigree, only nerve, where confidence could move faster than proof, where just looking successful was often enough to be treated as successful.
Isn't that like fake it till you make it?
Pretty much.
That's what I thought.
You project, I think everybody does to an extent, projects, the best of themselves in some way or another. But I think, deep down, when you get really close to somebody, you do see.
Yeah. It's just like, there's some cracks there.
It's not always as it seems.
Yeah. Well, Lynda Spence, a 27-year-old woman from Glasgow, learned how to maneuver through that space. Before she began presenting herself as a success, her financial situation was a little bit precarious. In December of 2008, Lynda declared bankruptcy, with debts just under £40,000. When those debts were written off around a year later, she was given a clean slate, on paper at least.
Well, that restart was made possible by money released after the sale of her late grandmother's bungalow, which entered the family and benefited Lynda directly. It allowed her to clear old ground and begin again. Soon after, she set up what she would describe as a mortgage and lettings business in Glasgow, operating under the name Fraser Properties.
Well, at least you applied that money into doing something instead of just going out and blowing it on stupid, dumb stuff. She's like, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm back to where I should be. I made a mistake before with some money, and now I'm like, okay, I got this money. I'm gonna apply it into a properties company and hopefully make something, great. So that's really good.
Yeah, I definitely think that's probably one of the best things to do if you get inheritance, is to set up yourself with some sort of business, because obviously, if it goes well, then obviously, it's like an investment of bringing in more yields and stuff in the future. So.
Well, by late 2009, Lynda was presenting herself as a financial advisor involved in property and investment. To those who encountered her socially or professionally, she appeared comfortable with money. Friends would later recall her ordering 300-pound bottles of Cristal champagne on nights out. She moved easily through clubs and bars, but was rarely short of cash for taxis, drinks, and dinners, and carried herself like someone used to be believed.
Well, what stood out most was the way that she talked. Lynda didn't speak carefully or hedge her claims. She talked in big numbers, millions instead of thousands. Big projects and overseas connections, not small local deals. She spoke fast, with confidence, and without stopping to doubt herself. If anyone questioned her, she didn't pull back. She added more detail. There was always another answer ready to cover the gap.
It's that confidence. Got to project that confidence.
Yeah, I think if, you talk to anybody, if they come across as knowing what they're talking about, there's no falter in, or stumbling in what they're saying, then you're likely to believe what they're saying. So,
you're like, I believe you, bro.
I can see that. Take them on face value, don't you, to be fair?
Yeah. Well, the authority she projected wasn't really backed up by experience, though. Her background in finance amounted to 5 years in a prudential call center, answering customer inquiries and following sales scripts, not managing money or advising investors. For all the confidence with which she spoke about Fraser Properties, there was no clear formal record of it operating as the kind of firm she described.
Well, outwardly, it worked. She dressed well, she drove expensive cars, she entertained generously. To those around her, she looked like someone who had landed on her feet. She didn't just sell investments, she sold proximity to money, to opportunity, to somewhere just out of reach. Over time, that extended beyond business and into identity itself. In later records and accounts, she appears under multiple names, not only using the Lynda Spence, but also other surnames, including Zafage.
So her family would later find a card bearing the name Lynda Zafage. Lynda had claimed she'd been married to an Albanian man while still a teenager, a relationship later described as a marriage of convenience. When one version of her life began to strain, another seemed ready to take its place.
At the centre of everything was property. Glasgow was expanding outward and upward, and Lynda placed herself firmly in the middle of that growth. She claimed everything was agreed, funded, and already underway. But in reality, nothing had moved beyond talk. When deadlines passed and money failed to appear, she explained it away as delays. Much of what follows is drawn from witness accounts, financial records, and police investigations. The allegations surrounding Lynda Spence's financial dealings were never tested in court, but they form some context in which her final months unfolded.
Yeah, everything was not on the up and up,
No.
but it never went to court or anything. So we do have to say everything now is dealing with her financial stuff is alleged.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is going forward. So behind the appearance, money was already moving in ways that couldn't last. She began taking deposits for flats that were never secured, often presenting deals as imminent and time-sensitive. It's that FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Oh, if you don't get this now, it's going to be gone, that type of thing. Over time, that expanded into substantial sums from multiple investors, including members of the Glasgow's Chinese community, who collectively paid around £175,000 for homes that never appeared. When progress failed to follow, delays were explained away, and new timelines quietly replaced the old.
The biggest story came later. Lynda began talking about a large land deal near Stansted Airport, a property purchase she claimed was linked to overseas investors and substantial sums of money. She said it was being held up by paperwork, but amongst those who committed money was Colin, who believed the deal was imminent. For him, it seemed to explain everything: the money she appeared to have, the money she still needed, and why no returns had arrived.
So people invested because the story made sense in context. Airports were expanding, property was booming, international money was flowing, and Lynda sounded like someone with access, someone who knew how to operate between those worlds. But months passed, and nothing concrete emerged. Dates slipped, timelines softened, details shifted. The deal was always so close. always nearly resolved, always waiting for that one final piece.
As investors' beliefs begin to thin, another layer was introduced. They were told they would be repaid not in cash, but through Danish government bearer bonds, high-value instruments said to belong to whoever physically held them. There were no names attached, no obvious paper trail. They were described as secure and untaxed. They looked official. They felt authoritative. They became reassurance, proof that the money existed and that the delays were procedural, not terminal.
And this sounds like some spy thriller, like financial spy thriller with, you got Danish bearer bonds. Like, you just hear about that, like, from TV and shit.
But then if there's people, are quite naive to and don't understand the world of, how property is, if they're just going to somebody that they think is knowledgeable and all this stuff, they're not going to think any different to all this, like, bond stuff and, And that's the thing with, like you said, with the bonds, it's whoever holds it owns it. It doesn't have anybody's name on it, none of that. Yeah.
So you just like, here you go. I don't have to sign it over to you. I don't have to prove. I just hand it to you.
Well, I'm a very skeptical person, so I'd think, this seems a bit fishy.
Well, for a time, that was enough. The bonds bought time, and they bought silence. But when attempts were made to have them authenticated, including a trip to the United States, the illusion collapsed almost immediately. Banks would not recognize them. The documents were exposed as crude and worthless. U.S. authorities expressed an interest to speaking to Lynda about the bonds, but before that could happen, she returned to Scotland. And with that, the last remaining explanation fell away.
Well, by early 2011, the consequences were no longer theoretical. Several people believed they were owed large sums of money they could not afford to lose. These weren't casual investments. For some, the funds represented savings. For others, borrowed capital. The tone of communication shifted. Messages became angry, then threatening. Reassurance was no longer enough.
Yeah, this wasn't just a couple £100. This was tens of thousands. That's a lot to lose.
You expect results, within a certain time frame, don't you? There's only so much you can long something out without starting to question.
Yeah, if I've
what
invested,
the hell is going on?
If I've invested like $50,000 with somebody in something, I need updates. I need, hey, what's going on with it? And
there's a lot of money to lose. Definitely.
Oh yeah. Well, in Glasgow, unresolved debts rarely remain abstract for long. They become personal. They accumulate memory. By now, the sense that Lynda Spence could simply move on to a new story or a new group of believers was fading. Too many people knew her name, and too many promises had been made and not kept.
And yet, in other parts of her life, things remained ordinary. Lynda stayed in close contact with her family, particularly her mother. Calls and texts were frequent. She visited regularly. To her parents, she was still their daughter, someone who took her mum shopping, who joked, who stayed connected, and was just an overall normal relationship with the parents.
Yep. She's just keeping that other side hidden away a little bit there. But what makes this period so unsettling is the double life she was living. On one level, Lynda was maintaining the routines of everyday life. On another, she was surrounded by unpaid debts, exposed deceptions, and people who felt humiliated, angry, and desperate to recover the money they believed was owed to them.
In April 2011, her options were narrowing fast. The Stansted deal that she had spoken about was no longer credible. The bonds had been exposed as worthless. The money was drying up. The explanations had run out. Spring had arrived in Glasgow. The smell of blossom on the trees, sunbreaking making the evenings lighter. On the 13th of April 2011, Lynda Spence visited her parents. It was her mother's birthday. But after that visit, the calls stopped. The messages went unanswered, and the silence that followed was not normal.
On Thursday, the 14th of April 2011, Lynda Spence was taken. At some point that day, in the Broomhill area of Glasgow, she was forced into a car. This was not a meeting that escalated. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a planned abduction. Whatever was said or promised beforehand no longer mattered once she was physically overpowered and removed from the street.
Damn.
That'd be scary as fuck.
Well, from there, they drove southwest, out of Glasgow and into North Ayrshire. The destination was a flat on Meadowfoot Road in West Kilbride, a quiet residential street far from the crowds and visibility of the city. It took her from noise into isolation, from witnesses into privacy. This was not by chance or convenience. It was a calculated move to a place where she could be controlled, unseen and unheard.
Waiting at the flat were David Parker and Paul Smith, the men who lived there and had agreed to let it be used. So when the abductors, Colin Coates and Philip Wade, arrived with Lynda, she was taken straight upstairs to the attic, a small enclosed space with limited room to move, where she was kept under control.
What followed was not improvised. Philip Wade arrived with a bag that functioned as a torture kit, tape, gloves and tools, including garden loppers, selected to restrain and injure her. The bag was taken into the room and kept there. Nothing about it suggested panic or chance.
Okay, this is where it gets pretty brutal. She was forced into a chair and restrained. Tape was wrapped across her arms and body, binding her in place so she could not stand, turn, or pull away. Sunglasses were taped to her face, interfering with her vision and sense of distance. This was not blindfolding for mercy, it was disorientation, designed to keep her unsteady and dependent on whoever stood in front of her.
From the first day, the pattern was set. Parker and Smith remained in the flat, keeping watch, while Coates and Wade came and went. Lynda kept bound to the chair, fixed in place. The purpose of the violence was not random cruelty. It was for interrogation. She was questioned about money, bank accounts, access and financial details that her captors believed she was withholding.
The days that followed didn't blur because nothing changed, but because the same actions were repeated again and again. Lynda was kept in that room, frequently restrained, returned again and again to the chair. She was not released overnight. She was not allowed to move freely. She remained exposed, dependent on the people who controlled that space.
She was beaten repeatedly. She was burned with a hot iron, pressed against her skin as punishment and pressure. She was struck with a golf club. Blows were delivered with enough force to shatter her kneecaps. Those were not threats or attempts at intimidation. They were injuries inflicted intentionally, with no effect made to limit the damage.
Oh, God.
Horrendous.
I mean, that's...
She must have been terrified.
Yeah, and then they leave, and then they come back, and every time you hear them coming up the steps, oh, Lord. So, well, it gets worse from here, because her toes were crushed, the tip of her little finger was cut off, and later one of her thumbs. It didn't happen all at once. The injuries caused to her were spread out over time. The pain stopped, then started again. Each time, it came back after a pause, when the money they wanted still hadn't been handed over.
Humiliation was part of it too. Lynda was kept restrained for long periods and denied even basic comfort. She wasn't allowed to leave the chair, not even to use the toilet. This wasn't neglect or carelessness, it was deliberate, a way of keeping control and wearing her down.
Oh, gosh. Well, through this time, Parker and Smith stayed in the flat. They can hear what was going on. I wouldn't have stayed there. They hear screaming and that.
I wouldn't be able to listen to stuff like that.
They knew the violence was happening and they didn't leave. They weren't the ones carrying it out, but by staying, they made sure it could keep going. The flat became a sealed off place, the same routine playing out day after day.
Outside of the house, life carried on as normal. Meadowfoot Road looked the same as it always did. Cars passed, curtains opened and closed. Inside, the home felt different. The same ceiling, the same walls, the same chair, and the same dread, waiting for footsteps to come back up the stairs.
Well, after about 13 days, something changed. Parker and Smith were dismissed by Coates and Wade, who told them simply, quote, "Yous can go." The men who had been watching were gone, and the flat was left to those at the center of it. What came next wasn't sudden. It was the end point of a stretch of violence that had already gone farther than it should have. After nearly 2 weeks of captivity, abuse, and injury, Lynda Spence was killed.
The violence didn't stop because anyone held back. It stopped because there was nothing left to take. After Lynda was killed, her body was dismembered in an attempt to make it disappear. The flat fell quiet, furniture was still in place. The room looked ordinary. But outside, the street carried on as normal. Inside, something irreversible had already been done.
The investigation began with what wasn't there rather than what was found. In mid-April of 2011, the routines that shaped Lynda's life abruptly stopped making sense. Phone calls went unanswered, messages left unread. The last confirmed sighting of Lynda was on the 13th of April, when she visited her parents. After that, contact stopped completely. At first, her parents waited, expecting a delayed call or a message explaining the silence.
But days passed, then weeks, with no word at all. This wasn't normal for Lynda. She had always stayed in close regular contact with her family, and especially her mother. By the 13th of May, a full month after she had last been seen, concern had turned into fear. Her parents contacted the police and reported her missing.
At that stage, there was no crime scene or witnesses. There were no signs of violence and no clear break in routine to explain what had happened. What existed was a disappearance. Officers opened a missing persons inquiry and began with the basics. When Lynda was last been seen, who had she spoken to, and whether there was any indication she had left by choice.
Yeah, it's possible. You know, some people just, I mean, I do. I don't message people, and it can go sort of a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Where I don't not contact somebody. I'm always talking to you, but anybody that I don't talk to on a regular basis.
But then that's something right there, because she was always in contact with her mother. Yeah. You're always in contact with me, pretty much.
You're always in contact with somebody, aren't you?
Yeah.
So,
it just doesn't go silent, just gone.
Yeah. Well, police began mapping the practical markers of her life. They worked through addresses, associates, routines, and areas of pressure. They established that she had left driving her silver Vauxhall Astra. Oh, I had one of them. That detail mattered immediately. Even with her phone silent, the car still had the potential to place her or someone else in specific locations at specific times. Because vehicles leave trails, and those trails can speak when people can't.
Officers spoke first mainly to family members, then to friends, and then to business contacts. What emerged quickly was that Lynda's life had been under significant strain in the weeks before she disappeared. Several people believed she owed them large sums of money. Some of those communications had grown aggressive and openly threatening. Investigators didn't jump to conclusions, though, but they could see risk accumulating around her. Pressure was not hypothetical. It was active and escalating.
Well, one name surfaced early, John Glenn, a property developer who believed Lynda owed him around £180,000. In the days before she vanished, he had sent her abusive messages demanding repayment. Some of those messages included threats to cut off her fingers and chop off her head. Police were aware of the content of those communications and spoke to Glenn as part of the early inquiry. But at that stage, they were still trying to understand the environment surrounding Lynda, not to assign guilt.
Yeah, they're just like, we need to find her first. We have all this, and we can go talk to him and be like, hey, man, this is pretty sketchy what you're sending her. Like,
yeah. And then obviously if they find her and they find that her, fingers and her head's been chopped off, then they'll think, well, hang on a minute, you
so
said
this
in messages,
We know a guy that said he was going to do that.
Yeah.
But also you're trying to figure out, okay, where did she go? Who did this? And then they went to him and was like, what's up with this sketchy shit?
Yeah.
But they also have
And
to
that's
follow
the thing,
other leads.
obviously people can make threats and be threatening with their words, but it's whether or not they follow through with things. So, people get angry, people say things.
Oh yeah. If someone took
everybody's going to act on everything they say.
Well, if someone took 180,000 pounds from me and they had nothing to show for it, I'd be like, hey man, where's my fucking money?
Yeah.
That's anybody would have that reaction to being like, if you don't give me my money, I'm going to beat your ass, and it escalates from there. But another figure appeared soon after, Colin Coates. He had invested approximately 85,000 pounds with Lynda and believed that the money was still recoverable. Philip Wade had also lost money connected to Lynda, including funds taken from members of his family, reinforcing the belief that significant sums were being withheld. These weren't distant business disagreements. For those people involved, the sums felt decisive, personal, and urgent. Money wasn't just missing. It was believed to be within reach, and that belief mattered.
In the early stages, police were careful not to assume violence. People do leave. Some disappeared deliberately. But this didn't look like preparation. There was no packed bags, no farewell messages, no financial activities suggesting a new life or a planned departure. Lynda hadn't withdrawn money or made arrangements. It suggested something that happened to her rather than a decision to leave.
Yeah, especially with someone who's looks like they have money. They're well off or whatever. She's buying 300-pound bottles of Cristal when they're out. You would think, hey, if they're going to leave somewhere, they're going to take out some money, or there's going to be...
There'll be some sort of trail of where they've headed, or, any plans that they've got in the making. So, for there to not be any movement with her banking, things like that, of course,
banking.
It's going to really get your brain thinking, well, hang on a minute, something must have happened.
Yeah, and if they go to her house and all her bags are there and her clothes are, and there's nothing gone, it's like, well, don't think she went, to Spain for a holiday or anything.
Plan to leave and go anywhere.
Yeah. Well, as the days passed without any contact, police escalated the search. A national appeal was launched. Lynda's parents appeared publicly, asking her to get in touch if she was safe and urging anyone with information to come forward. The appeal was framed as urgent but not criminal. Officers needed sightings. They needed movement. They needed something, anything, to puncture the silence, but nothing did.
Behind the scenes, the investigation widened. Phone records were requested. Financial activity was examined. Lynda's life was complicated. She used more than one phone, held multiple accounts, and told different versions of her story. And that made it harder for police to see a clear picture. As officers worked through the volume of material, the inquiry began to slow. Then, one development changed everything.
Well, Lynda's mobile phone was handed in after being found in a wheelie bin outside a sandwich shop in Kilbirnie. That is so much luck right there that someone was like, hey, a phone.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a miracle.
I mean, I don't look in the bin when I go and put something in it.
Yeah.
So,
just a random wheelie really bin lucky. Next to a sandwich shop. You're not digging around and, but it must have been the owner or something. But it was like, hey, let's fish this phone out and see what it is. But it wasn't near her home. It wasn't near her parents. It wasn't anywhere she had a clear reason to be. Police indicated that the phone had not been recently used by Lynda herself. Whoever discarded it had made a decision, one that made the idea of voluntary disappearance increasingly difficult to sustain.
From that point on, the investigation shifted. Specialist detectives were brought in, and the focus moved from locating Lynda to understanding what had happened to her. What had begun as a missing person inquiry started to take on the shape of a serious crime investigation. Even though there was no body and no confirmed crime scene, the absence of her itself was now being treated as evidence.
Yep. It kind of starts piecing together and you're like, uh-oh, this is not looking good.
Yeah.
You hope for the best that she just took off for a couple weeks or whatever on a holiday or something. But with this starting to piece together, it's not looking good.
No, it starts to lead the investigation in a different direction for sure.
So attention turned to movement as well. Automatic number plate recognition data showed Lynda's silver Vauxhall Astra traveling through North Ayrshire in the days after she disappeared. That information was cross-referenced with mobile phone records. On the 20th of April, the Astra was captured by ANPR cameras on the A77. Within roughly a minute, phone data placed Philip Wade in the same area, with records for Colin Coates also consistent with him being nearby. Lynda had last been seen on the 13th of April. Her car moving alongside their devices 6 days later strongly suggested it was under someone else's control.
Months later, the pressure around unpaid money surfaced again, this time in a way that couldn't be dismissed. John Glenn told the police that during a meeting with Coates, he was threatened and shown a severed human thumb. Coates told him it belonged to Lynda Spence. It was the first time anyone outside the immediate group had been confronted with physical proof that something catastrophic had taken place. Glenn went straight to the police.
Yeah, I would too.
So would I.
Someone shows me a severed thumb.
Someone showed me some human thumb and said that it was, I think you need to look at these people.
Yeah, that is huge. Like, it was good that he didn't just stay quiet or be intimidated. That he just was like, you know what? Screw the money. Screw all this shit. I'm going straight to the cops because this is crazy.
And then also probably doesn't want to be,
caught up in it.
Yeah, basically.
Because he had them threatening messages as well. So he's like, uh-oh.
They find her and she's got missing feet. They're going to think it's me. So yeah, definitely.
Well, that disclosure changed the direction of the case. Surveillance was authorized and covert recording equipment was deployed. Investigators were no longer trying to establish whether a crime had taken place. From that point on, the focus shifted to identifying those responsible and gathering proof that could stand up in court.
Well, attention returned to a flat on Meadowfoot Road in West Kilbride. The address appeared repeatedly in movement data and communication records. It was linked not only to Colin Coates and Philip Wade, but also to the other two men, David Parker and Paul Smith. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence.
So when the police finally got there and searched the flat, much of it had been cleaned or altered. The flooring had been replaced, furniture had been removed, but not everything could be erased. Officers recovered a fingerprint belonging to Coates. In the bathroom, they found a small blood stain, and forensic testing confirmed it belonged to Lynda Spence. What had been a disappearance now had a place, and it had evidence.
Found some crime scene.
Thought you could clean up, and nope. There was one little splotch that they missed and that one fingerprint.
Which is great to find.
Yep.
That, it kind of pinpoints it, puts her there, puts her with especially the Coates guy because of his fingerprint. But yeah, so by the autumn of 2011, the evidence had come together. On the 31st of October in 2011, police had acted. Colin Coates, Philip Wade, David Parker and Paul Smith were arrested and charged with the abduction and murder of Lynda Spence. What had begun as silence, the police had built a picture. What they uncovered could no longer be explained away.
Got him. Yeah.
Now it's just to prove it in court.
Hell yeah, got him. So the case came before the High Court in Glasgow on the 16th of January 2013. 4 men stood in the dock. Colin Coates, Philip Wade, David Parker, and Paul Smith. They faced charges of abduction, prolonged detention, and murder. From the outset, it was clear the court was not being asked to judge a single act, but a sequence of decisions made over time.
And this type of court case would be difficult to prove, because they didn't have her body.
Yep.
So, they could only go on the minuscule of evidence in the sense of, okay, how can you prove that,
there could be all sorts of different theories that could,
Exactly.
he's like, Coates could just be like, I was there at one point. I know these two guys. We hung out a little bit. My fingerprints there. Lynda was there at one point. We were all hanging out, and she had a bloody nose.
Mm-hmm. There's so many different scenarios that they could put forward.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at it, it's like a puzzle, isn't it? And, you know, all these tiny little things build up that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's quite I would personally be a bit, because they haven't found the body, so I would be a bit unsure. But
that's up to the prosecution to lay it out correctly in a correct sequence to explain how these all fit together. And that's such an amazing thing that they can do. You know, such smart people.
Yeah, timelines and everything, all the evidence that they do have. Let's get on with the case and see where that all led. The Crown's task was not to recreate the crime, but to prove control. Lynda Spence's body had never been recovered, and no single piece of evidence stood on its own. Instead, prosecutors built their case by drawing on phone data, vehicle movements, forensic findings from the flat, and witness testimony to show a pattern of deliberate detention and sustained violence driven by money, not panic.
The trial ran for almost 12 weeks. Day after day, the jury heard the evidence returned from different angles, timelines revisited, movements compared. The repetition was intentional. The Crown's position was consistent throughout. This was not a moment of anger or an argument that escalated. It was control exercised deliberately and maintained over time.
Well, midway through the trial, the balance shifted. David Parker and Paul Smith entered guilty pleas to reduce the charges of abduction and assault. In return, the murder charges against them were dropped. They left the dock and re-entered the courtroom as prosecution witnesses. Their evidence placed Coates and Wade at the centre of events inside the flat and fundamentally changed the dynamics of the case.
Flipped them.
Yep.
Those boys were like, nah, I'm not going down for this.
But that's the thing. I mean, if I was them too, I'd be like, look, you know, yes, we were in the place, not when she was murdered, you know, but we had nothing to do with that. Yes, we should have come to the police and informed you, you know, but we were frightened or whatever of them. But I think if you 100% was not involved in the murder, then you're going to sit there, you know, and you will say, well, actually, it was them. You know, it wasn't us. Yes, we were there, but, you know, and you just fully be honest.
Yep.
And that is the best way to be.
Well, from that point on, the trial became less about what had happened and more about how responsibility should be assigned. Evidence was presented in categories rather than a narrative. Who was present, who moved where, which phones were active, and when. The Crown argued that Coates and Wade exercised control throughout. The defense challenged that interpretation, focusing on inconsistencies, alternative explanations, and the credibility of witnesses who now stood to benefit from reduced sentences. Which is, I could see that too.
Very, you know, I can see them going down that route and find, you know, coming to that sort of conclusion on that. But, like I said, you know, it's hell. I'm not going to go down for murder when I did not murder.
Yeah.
You know, so it's.
But then they could just explain it and say, well, they only did that to save themselves and put all the blame on these two guys while they get to have reduced sentences.
Yeah.
And they don't have full accountability, blah, 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 you know.
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because you think, well, you know that what they were doing in the beginning, obviously they'd been told to leave prior to her being murdered, but they could have stopped it.
Yeah.
So
they could have went to the police. They could have, at any point.
They were involved, 100%. Well, both Coates and Wade chose to give evidence themselves.
Ooh, that's risky.
Very risky.
Oh, geez. Your attorney would be like, no.
Don't do it. Yeah. Well, that decision placed their accounts directly before the jury. Each denied responsibility. Each rejected the Crown's version of events, insisting that Lynda had not been held against her will and that they were not responsible for her disappearance. Their testimony was weighed against weeks of evidence already heard.
Well, when closing speeches ended, the jury retired and remained out for 5 days. When they returned, they found both Coates and Wade guilty of abducting, detaining, and murdering Lynda Spence.
Sentencing followed. Both men received life in prison. The punishment part was set at 33 years for Coates and 30 years for Wade, reflecting the seriousness and the duration of the offences. In remarks reported at the time, the judge described Coates as the prime mover in the crime. Parker and Smith were each sentenced to 11 years in prison after pleading guilty to detaining Lynda against her will, assaulting her, and attempting to defeat the ends of justice.
Yeah, I think, they were staring down the barrel of 30 years and thought, no, I didn't do this, man. I'll take 11. In the years after the verdicts, the case did not fade away. For Lynda Spence's parents, James and Patricia, there was no moment where life returned to what it had been before. Justice had been delivered in court, but resolution never followed. What remains was endurance. Anniversaries marked quietly, routines reshaped by absence, and the knowledge that some questions would never be answered, no matter how much time had passed.
In a statement released after the trial, they spoke about the cruelty of what Lynda had endured and the impossibility of imagining her suffering. No verdict, they said, could bring their daughter back or spare her from what she had been put through. They described a level of heartache that words struggled to reach. Forgiveness, they made clear, was beyond reach. Not out of anger, but because the harm done could never be undone.
They also spoke about who Lynda had been before the crime came to define her name. A warm, kind, and thoughtful daughter. Someone who always had time for others. That was the person that they wanted remembered. Not the financial disputes, not the violence, and not the way her life ended, but the life she had lived before it was taken from her. A daughter they loved and would continue to miss.
Colin Coates and Philip Wade were sent into the Scottish prison system to serve life sentences measured in decades. Coates was held at HMP Shotts, the county's highest security prison, reserved for those convicted of the most serious crimes. Wade was also held within the high security estate. Neither man has ever said what they did with Lynda Spence after killing her, a silence that would follow them into every stage of imprisonment.
Well, that silence later took a wider legal significance. In 2020, England and Wales introduced the Prisoners' Disclosure of Information About Victims Act, more widely known as Helen's Law, named after Helen McCourt, whose killer never revealed where her body was hidden. The law requires parole boards to formally consider an offender's refusal to disclose information about a victim's remains when deciding whether to release is appropriate.
Well, although Coates and Wade were sentenced years before the law came into force, it applies to all parole decisions made after its introduction. In practical terms, their refusal to provide answers is no longer something that can be ignored. Silence is now weighed alongside risk, remorse, and the ongoing harm caused to the victim's family. It does not prevent release automatically, but it does raise the bar and makes withholding the truth a matter of record.
David Parker and Paul Smith were later released from custody. Based on sentencing practices in Scotland at the time, both men became eligible for release after serving part of their sentences, so around 2018-2019. Their involvement had been acknowledged in court, their punishment imposed, and their names gradually receded from public view, even as the consequences of what happened in West Kilbride continued to ripple outward.
And the flat on Meadowfoot Road in West Kilbride returned to its ordinary use. It was not sealed off or permanently marked. For anyone passing by without knowing the case, it remained just another address on a quiet street. That ordinariness mattered, not as atmosphere, but as a reminder of how sustained violence can take place behind unremarkable doors, unseen by the world outside.
Over time, Lynda Spence's case has come to represent more than its individual facts. It is now referenced in discussions about financial fraud, coercive violence, and the dangers that can arise when deception, debt, and desperation collide. Her actions involved sustained dishonesty. What followed was something else entirely: extreme brutality.
What remains is not closure, but clarity. Looking resolved was never the same as being resolved. The verdicts brought an end to the case, but not to the loss. For Lynda Spence's family, the absence continues, unchanged by time, unchanged and untouched by sentencing, and carried forward long after the attention moved on.
Yeah, they deserve to know.
They deserve to know where their daughter is, and I find it so difficult to understand why the criminals just don't inform them. It's heartbreaking.
Well, there was allegedly Coates' cellmate had come forward and said that he'd admitted to him that he killed her and all that. But yeah, it's so cruel to the family to just withhold something like that, to not be able to bury them properly.
Yeah, definitely, for them to not be able to lay her to rest. Hopefully, even no matter how much time goes on, hopefully one day there will be, where they find her body.
Yeah, it was only like a couple, I think it was in 2022. There was a big search, but they thought possibly they knew where she was, but they couldn't find anything.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. Hopefully they will be able to find her and lay her to rest, properly.
Yeah.
One day, no matter whether that's near or in the future, fingers crossed.
Yeah. And, like it doesn't, obviously we don't want to excuse like what she was doing, allegedly taking money from people and being financial fraud.
Oh, of course. Yeah. We don't agree with her actions and behaviors.
But good God,
in that sense,
she didn't deserve to go through all of that.
What she deserved was the people that she owed money to go to the police.
Yeah.
And have them investigate her, not go out and torture and murder her.
Yeah.
Nobody has the right, no matter what, to take another's life, in my view. So, someone does you wrong, go to the police.
Yeah. I mean, all you had to do is say, hey man, I invested this money with this lady and it's nowhere to be found. Can you go investigate it? And they would have uncovered all this stuff going on.
Essentially, it's a theft.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think if anything like that, just you can't take things into your own hands and cause people, because it's not just the victim, it's the victim's family, their friends, that are left behind, having to, you cause them so much grief.
But unfortunately, she got in with some bad dudes.
Yeah.
But, obviously by the looks of it, they that luck of what she was running through with all this money, and she ran into these guys who are bad news, and that's how it turned out. They said, no, we're no cops, we'll handle it ourselves, and that's just crazy.
Well, my advice is never handle anything yourself, go to the police.
Yep. 100%.
Well, thank you for listening, guys. If you'd like to support the work that we do here in the archive, please take a moment to follow the show and leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others to discover the stories that we tell and keeps the archive growing. Sharing the podcast with someone who loves true crime also makes a huge difference.
Hell yeah. Tell everybody. You can also follow us on TikTok and Instagram at MurderMostBritish and on Facebook at MMB Podcast. And if you'd like to come chat with us and other listeners, come join us on the public Crypt Chat and Discord. And it's a space where we can talk about cases and theories and get updates from the archive.
Everything you need is socials, Discord, and more. All the links is in our link tree down below.
So until next week, stay safe, stay curious.
Take care.